You're reading this right now. Words on a screen, letters arranged in a specific order that your brain instantly converts into meaning. But stop for a second and think about how insane that actually is. You're looking at flat lines and curves, random squiggles that have been agreed upon by billions of people to mean specific things. And somehow, through those squiggles alone, I can make you angry, make you cry, make you understand a concept you've never encountered before. Writing is genuinely one of the most powerful inventions in human history. But here's the thing that nobody talks about: it was never supposed to exist. And the fact that you can read this sentence right now is the result of one of the most unlikely accidents in our entire species' timeline. Let's go back, way back. We're talking 100,000 years ago. Modern humans exist. We have language. We can speak. We can communicate complex ideas, emotions, stories. We can tell someone exactly how to make a spear, how to hunt a deer, where the water is during a drought. Language is incredible, but there is one massive problem with language. It disappears the moment it leaves your mouth. You tell someone a story, and the second the words are done echoing, they're gone. You can ask them to repeat it, but they might forget details, they might get it wrong, they might add their own twist. By the time that story gets passed to a fifth person, it's completely different from what you originally said. And for most of human history, this was just how things worked. Knowledge passed from person to person, generation to generation, slowly degrading, changing, getting lost. But then something shifted. Humans started to realize they had a problem they needed to solve. Around 12,000 years ago, the world changed. We started farming. For the first time in human history, people stayed in one place. They grew crops, they domesticated animals, they built permanent settlements. And with permanent settlements came something new: complexity. Suddenly, you had hundreds of people living together. You had crops that needed to be divided. You had livestock that needed to be counted. You had taxes that needed to be collected. You had records that needed to be kept. And the human brain, as incredible as it is, simply couldn't keep track of all this information anymore. You couldn't remember how many grain stores the village had. You couldn't remember who owed what to whom. You couldn't remember the terms of a trade agreement made 6 months ago. So people started using symbols. The first writing system wasn't actually writing as we know it, it was accounting. Around 8000 BC, in ancient Mesopotamia, the Sumerians faced this exact problem. They had a thriving civilization. They had temples, they had agriculture, they had complex trade networks, and they needed to keep track of everything. So they invented clay tokens, physical objects that represented different quantities of different items. A cone-shaped token might mean a measure of grain, a sphere might mean a measure of oil, a cylinder might mean a sheep. You could hold these tokens in your hand, show them to someone else, and they would instantly understand what you were talking about. No language barrier, no forgetting, physical evidence. It was genius. But then someone realized something even more ingenious. Instead of carrying around hundreds of clay tokens, what if you just drew pictures of them on clay tablets? You could take a stylus, press it into wet clay, and create an impression that looked like a cone, and everyone would know that meant grain. A picture of a cone, a picture of a sphere, a picture of a cylinder. Problem solved. You could carry one clay tablet instead of a bag full of tokens, and this was the birth of writing. Not as a way to record literature or poetry, not as a way to write love letters or tell stories. Writing was invented because people needed to count their sheep. For centuries, cuneiform writing stayed purely practical. It was numbers, it was inventory lists, it was transaction records. Temple priests would use it to track tax payments. Merchants would use it to record trades. But the symbols kept getting more and more refined, more and more abstract. Eventually, they stopped looking like tiny clay tokens and started looking like actual written symbols. And somewhere along the way, someone realized something crucial. If you could use symbols to represent physical objects, why couldn't you use symbols to represent sounds? This is where it gets interesting, because once you make that leap, everything changes. Suddenly, you're not limited to representing just things you can draw pictures of. You can represent abstract concepts. You can represent actions. You can represent adjectives. You can represent emotions. A symbol that looks like a mouth could represent the sound a mouth makes. A symbol that looks like water could represent the sound of water. And if you put symbols together, you can create new words. You can create sentences. You can create languages on clay. The Sumerians didn't fully develop this system. They kept their cuneiform pretty tied to the original picture-based approach, but other civilizations took the idea further. Around 3200 BC, the ancient Egyptians developed hieroglyphics, which used both pictures and sound-based symbols. A picture of an eye could mean the eye itself, or it could represent the sound that the word eye makes, depending on context. It was beautiful, elaborate, and incredibly complex. Only the most educated people in Egyptian society could read and write. And that's actually where writing stayed for thousands of years. It was a tool of the elite, of priests and scribes and government officials. The common person didn't need to read or write, they had scribes for that. But the real revolution happened around 1200 BC, and it came from an unlikely place. The Phoenicians were traders. They sailed the Mediterranean Sea, buying and selling goods, coming into contact with dozens of different civilizations. And they had a problem. All these different writing systems in all these different places made trade incredibly complicated. Egyptian hieroglyphics worked great if you were trading with Egypt, but if you were sailing to Greece next week, you had to learn an entirely different system. It was inefficient. So the Phoenicians did something radical. They simplified. They created an alphabet. Just 22 symbols, each one representing a single sound. That's it. No pictures of eyes or water or cones, just the pure sound of the language. A, B, C, D, E. Each letter a building block that could be combined to create any word in the language. And this is the moment everything changed forever, because suddenly writing became accessible. You didn't have to be a priest who spent 10 years memorizing hundreds of different symbols. You could learn 22 letters and write anything. Trade documents became easier, knowledge became easier to spread, and most importantly, writing was no longer just a tool for the elite. Ordinary people could learn it. They did learn it. The Greeks took the Phoenician alphabet and modified it slightly. The Romans took the Greek alphabet and modified it slightly. And now we're using a version of the alphabet that the Phoenicians invented 3,200 years ago. The alphabet you're reading right now. This exact arrangement of letters. But here's what most people don't realize. Writing didn't just help humans communicate, it actually changed how humans think. Before writing, knowledge had to be remembered, so humans developed incredible memorization techniques, oral traditions, poetry and rhythm and repetition, stories that were specifically crafted to stick in your brain. If you wanted to remember something, you had to encode it into your memory itself. But once writing was invented, you didn't have to do that anymore. You could just write it down. Your brain didn't need to hold all the information. You could externalize it, put it somewhere else, and suddenly your brain was free to think about bigger things, more complex things. The people who invented writing thought they were just trying to keep track of grain supplies, but what they really did was free up humanity's cognitive capacity to build civilizations, to do science, to create art, to develop philosophy, to eventually reach out and land people on the moon. Every single achievement of human civilization in the last 5,000 years depends on writing. Democracy depends on written laws. Science depends on written records. History depends on written accounts. Art and literature and music theory all depend on writing. Without it, we would still be hunter-gatherers, passing down stories by word of mouth, limited to what a single person's brain could hold and communicate in a lifetime. And the absolute craziest part of this entire story is that it happened by accident. Some accountant in ancient Mesopotamia was tired of carrying around clay tokens. They wanted a shortcut, and in looking for that shortcut, they accidentally invented the technology that would define human civilization. They didn't set out to change the world, they just wanted their job to be easier. So the next time you pick up a book, or you write an email, or you read something on your phone, remember this: you're doing something that humans didn't know how to do for 99% of our existence. You're taking abstract thoughts and converting them into symbols that can travel through space and time. A person who lived 2,000 years ago can still speak to you directly through writing. You can read their words, their thoughts, their ideas exactly as they wrote them. Writing is time travel. It's the closest thing humanity has to immortality, and it started because someone was annoyed with their daily chores.